Chapter 13. Together. That night, Addy was so excited that it took her a long time to fall asleep. In the middle of the night, she woke up. She sat up to make sure what had happened wasn't a dream. The room was filled with silvery moonlight, and Addy smiled when she saw Auntie Lula and Esther sleeping on her bed. Addy looked over and saw Sam on his pallet and Mama and Papa in their bed. Finally, Addy thought, we all here. The next morning, Esther and Lula were still asleep when Addy left for school. They worn out, whispered Mama. Be quiet so you don't wake them. Addy bent over the bed and gave both Esther and Lula kisses so light that they didn't even stir in their sleep. It was the last day of school before the Christmas holiday, so school was let out early. Addy was in a hurry to get home to see Esther and Auntie Lula before she went out to make her deliveries. But she had something else to do first. She ran to Sarah's house and found Sarah folding sheets and stacking them in a pile. "Sarah," Addy exclaimed, "we found them. Auntie Lula and Esther is home with us." Sarah threw her arms around Addy and both girls tumbled to the floor, falling onto a pile of sheets. "Tell me the whole story," Sarah demanded, "and don't leave out anything." So Addy told Sarah how glad she was that she stayed so long at the hospital with Mr. Polk. If she had gone to the church any earlier, she would have missed Esther and Auntie Lula. Sarah sighed. "Finally, the dream of having your family back together done and true." "Yes," Addy said, "except for Uncle Solomon, it has." She and Sarah sat in silence for a moment, and then Addy observed, "Sarah, you got new boots." "They my Christmas gifts," Sarah said proudly. "My mama and papa gave them to me early." "We earned enough money." "Look here," Addy said. "I got you a Christmas present too." From her satchel, Addy pulled a small package wrapped in brown paper. Sarah opened the package. It was a slate, just like the one that had broken. "Oh, Addy, I ain't never gonna need a slate again," Sarah said, and tears began to well in her eyes. Addy put her arms around her. "Don't give up hoping, Sarah," she said, holding back her own tears. "Maybe someday you can come back to school. But even if you can't, I can help you keep up with our lessons. You done taught me so many things." Sarah dried her eyes. "Thanks," she said, holding the slate gently. "I'd like that." When Addy left Sarah's house, she hurried through her deliveries so she could get back to her family. The minute she came through the door of the boarding house, she could smell supper cooking. And what a supper it was! Mama and Mrs. Golden had made everyone's favorites. Smoked ham, collard greens, rice and peas, biscuits, and sweet potato pudding for dessert. Auntie Lula was too weak to come down to the dining room to eat. So before the family sat down, Addy brought her a tray of food. Addy knelt next to the bed while Auntie Lula ate. She noticed that Auntie Lula just picked at her food. "Ain't you hungry?" Addy asked. Auntie Lula put down her fork and shook her head. "I can't say that I am," she said. She patted the bed. "Come sit up here. I want to tell you something." Addy moved the tray and sat on the bed. Auntie Lula took one of Addy's hands in hers. "When you and your mama left the plantation, I was worried about y'all," she said. "But Solomon wasn't. He knew you all was going to make it to freedom." "He helped us," Addy said, "but he didn't even get a chance to enjoy freedom himself." "Uncle Solomon celebrated his freedom back when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation," Auntie Lula said. "You know the masters didn't pay that proclamation no mind, because the South had broke away from the North. But when Solomon heard about it, child, he came into our cabin and strutted around so proud and happy. And then he got down on his knees and thanked the Lord." Auntie Lula started to cough. Addy handed her a glass of water from the tray. Auntie Lula continued, I don't want you to be sad about Uncle Solomon dying, and I don't want you to be sad when I die. Don't say that, Addy said. You're not going to die anytime soon. There's a time for each of us to die, said Auntie Lula. Uncle Solomon ain't have much time and freedom, and I won't either. Addy, we don't all make it where we want to go in life. We start our journeys and have our dreams and hopes, and sometimes other people have to carry on with them when we can't. She closed her eyes and sank back on the pillows. I think I better rest now. Addy kissed Auntie Lula on the forehead, turned down the lamp, and sat by her until she fell asleep. 2 days before Christmas, Auntie Lula died. Addy's heart was filled with sorrow. She loved Auntie Lula, who had been like a grandmother to her. Ever since Addy could remember, Auntie Lula had looked after Addy and her family back on the plantation. She nursed them when they were sick. Like Uncle Solomon, she gave them advice, comfort, and friendship. Auntie Lula and Uncle Solomon had taken good care of Esther when Addy and Mama had to leave her behind, and they had used their last strength to bring Esther back to the family. Now, Auntie Lula was gone, and with her death, Addy's dream of having her whole family together in freedom was gone too. Christmas passed quickly. The sadness the family felt over the death of Auntie Lula dulled the joy of the holiday. On the last day of the year, their mood brightened a bit as they prepared for the Emancipation celebration at the church. Papa and Sam left for church right after supper to help set up extra seats. Addy was supposed to go with them while Mama helped Mrs. Golden wash the dishes. But when Mama came up with Esther, Addy was still there. She was sitting on her bed in the darkness. She had not even bothered to light the lamp. Addy, what you still doing here? Mama asked. You ain't even dressed yet. I don't want to go to the celebration at church tonight, Mama, said Addy. Why not? Asked Mama. I don't think I can stand up in front of all them folks and read those words in the Emancipation Proclamation about freedom, Addy said. Her eyes filled with tears. Uncle Solomon's dead. Auntie Lula's dead. My dream of having our whole family together again in freedom can never come true now. Oh, Addy, Addy, said Mama with a sigh. She put her arms around Addy. Esther came over to them. She offered her Janny doll to Addy. Here, Addy, she said. Don't cry. Addy took the doll from her sister. Oh, Mama, look at Esther, she said. We never got to see her first steps or hear her first words. We can't ever get back the time we missed with her. Mama was quiet for a while. Then she said, Remember what Uncle Solomon said, Addy. Freedom's got its costs. Sometimes a very big cost. Mama lifted the cowrie shell on Addy's necklace and held it in her hands. You remember when I gave this to you? We were running away from slavery. We had nothing but each other and hope. I remember, said Addy. I told you this shell belonged to Papa's grandma, who was torn away from her family in Africa and brought across the ocean to be a slave. Mama went on in a soft voice. This shell was to remind you that we are all linked to the people in our past forever. They live in our hearts. Their lives and their strength and courage are part of us, even though they're gone. Addy took a shuddery breath. She thought about Auntie Lula and Uncle Solomon and her great-grandmother long ago. Mama smiled at Addy. Do you think you can go to the celebration? Yes, Mama, said Addy. I can. When the church service started, Addy sat in the front pew with the other children who were going to read and recite. She was the last speaker. She sat still and tried to listen carefully as the other boys and girls gave their speeches. Finally, Reverend Drake said, We all gathered here tonight to celebrate the anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It contains some words that are important to many who were held in the bonds of slavery. I want you all to listen closely now while Addy Walker reads the Emancipation Proclamation. Addy's knees were shaking as she walked up the steps at the front of the church. The words she was supposed to read were written on a scroll of paper that she gripped tightly. Addy opened the scroll and looked out at the congregation. She swallowed hard. She had never spoken in front of so many people before. Then she saw her family looking up at her, their faces full of love and pride. There was Sam, who had lost his arm in the war to end slavery, and Esther, whose babyhood had been lost to them all. She saw Papa and remembered the night back in their cabin on the plantation when he had first whispered the word, freedom. She saw Mama, whose hope and strength had never failed. And though they were not there, Addy thought of Uncle Solomon and Auntie Lula too, and remembered how much of the Emancipation Proclamation had meant to Uncle Solomon. Addy started to speak, and the words came easily. Her voice was loud and clear as she read the proclamation with its words that had changed the lives of everyone she loved. When Addy finished, it was midnight, and it seemed as if the whole church exploded with joy. The bells rang out, not just from her church, but from churches all over the city. Everyone stood, cheering and hugging and kissing. Addy came down the steps and moved into the crowd, standing on tiptoe, trying to find her family. Suddenly, she felt a hand slip into hers. It was Esther. Addy smiled down at her sister and asked, "Where are we going, Esther?" Esther smiled back. "Home," she said. "That's right," said Addy. "We're going home together." So now I want to show you this. Inside Addy's world. So this kind of is like a miniature historical lesson that tells you about like the time of slavery and Civil War, which is when this story took place. So I'm just going to read that to you. Inside Addy's world. In 1865, the Civil War ended after 4 terrible years. Soldiers hurried home to their loved ones. Newly freed slaves returned to the plantations where they'd last seen their parents, children, and spouses. Families separated by slavery and by war began to be reunited, just as the North and South were joining together again as one nation. Less than a week after the South surrendered, President Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed while watching a play. The death of a man who had worked so hard to end slavery left many Americans deeply saddened. Lincoln's assassination made the nation's recovery much more difficult. The years after the Civil War are called Reconstruction because of the efforts to rebuild or reconstruct the nation. These efforts took place mostly in the South, which suffered much more damage than the war in the North did. After the war, Congress amended or changed the Constitution to ensure freedom and citizenship for Black Americans. The 13th Amendment ended in slavery. The 14th Amendment gave citizenship to Black Americans, and the 15th Amendment gave all male citizens the right to vote, regardless of their race. Congress also created the Freedmen's Bureau to help former slaves adjust to lives as free people, since most did not have homes, jobs, or educations. The Bureau set up schools in the South for former slaves. It helped set up colleges for Black students and provided medical help and other services. Even so, the lives of most Black people did not improve very much after the Civil War. Many white people in the South disagreed with Reconstruction. They were angry that they were no longer allowed to have slaves and that men who had been slaves could now vote. So Southern states passed laws called Black Codes that forced African Americans to work for low wages and made it hard for them to buy land. Southern states also passed laws to segregate or separate Black people from white people. These laws forced Black people to use separate areas in restaurants, hotels, and other public places, or to use entirely separate buildings. In the North, it was hard for Black people to get jobs or educations. There was less violence against Black people in that part of the country, but there was still prejudice and segregation. People like Addy's parents were lucky to find decent paying jobs. By the mid-1870s, Reconstruction had helped rebuild the South and had given Black people new legal rights. But Black and white people were still not equals in American society. African Americans were often abused or treated violently, so they continued to struggle for equal rights, sometimes risking their lives. For example, Ida B. Wells, a Mississippi teacher, wrote newspaper articles about violence against Black Americans in the late 1800s and early 1900s. She wanted people everywhere to know what was happening in the South. She hoped all fair-minded citizens would join her protests against such violence. African Americans fought for equality through their churches and organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAA or NAACP. Created in 1909, the NAACP created a youth council in 1936 so that children like Addy could learn about their civil rights and take active roles in fighting segregation and discrimination. Black people broke through the barrier of prejudice in other ways too. They became doctors, educators, athletes, scientists, politicians, and inventors. During the 1920s, African American artists, musicians, dancers, and writers became famous in what is known as the Harlem Renaissance. By celebrating Black culture and traditions, African Americans encouraged others to take pride in their own experiences. They also showed white Americans a fuller picture of Black life. The fight for equality continues today as people of all races work for fairness in our society. So that's the end of the book, Addy, A Heart Full of Hope. And I think this is a perfect segue to the next story I will be reading on live, if TikTok lets me go on live. But anyway, next story I will be reading is this. Meet Claudie, an American girl. And this story takes place in the Harlem Renaissance, which is where, what I was just talking about a minute ago. So I'm really excited to start this book with you guys, and I hope you join me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the Addy story, and I hope you join me for the Claudie story. So until then, I will see you next time. Bye.